Hello, everyone. My name is Ali, or Novo Amor, as you know me as. Thank you for being here. We're just going to have a little conversation about the Earth Defender video. I'd like to introduce you to my friends Sil and Yorick from Studio Birthplace, who have made a number of music videos for myself and with myself, Terraform, Birthplace, Repeat Until Death, Sleepless. And yeah, we have a kind of a long working relationship of just making creative content that is, I guess, environmentally focused for the most part. So Sil and Yorick, say hello.
Hello, hello. So nice to be here. Thank you so much, Ali. Yeah, we
Hello,
have
everyone.
quite the journey. I'm Jörg, and yeah, here's Sil as well.
So nice to be on this chat. And also with us, we have Kynan, Tegar, who is from the indigenous community Sungai Utik in Kalimantan, Indonesia. Maybe you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I mean, you already introduced me. My name is Kynan. I make films, and I come from the Iban people, where the Earth Defender film was shot in. And it's really nice to be here chatting with you guys.
Yeah, same. Thank you so much for being involved in this. You all did such an amazing job. The video is amazing, and I really hope people are taking something from it. You told the important story in such a creative and beautiful way. I hope it's resonating with a lot of people. So, Kynan, do you think you could explain in more detail what an Earth Defender is, and give like a real-world example, and what some misconceptions about Indigenous people might be?
Did we just lose him? Kynan is calling in from Indonesia at the moment, so maybe he's having a little internet hiccup. We can jump in while we wait for Kynan. So, oh, sorry, Ali, you're muted.
I think Keenan's back.
There he is.
Can you hear us, Kynan?
Hi, sorry.
Oh, that's all good. I'm not sure if you heard the question. Do you think you could explain what an Earth Defender is, and give like a real world example, and some misconceptions about Indigenous people?
Yeah, right. So, an Earth Defender is an Indigenous person, or anyone who is connected with nature. That, for me, is what Earth Defender is. People who are willing to risk their life and, in many instances, sacrifice their lives in protection of nature. And that's simply just because of how connected Earth Defenders are with the natural world, the forest that surrounds them, the rivers, the seas, the oceans. And a real life example of that would, I suppose, there are many real life examples of Earth Defenders. There are peoples right now defending the nickel mines in Halmahera, for example, who are defending their lands from these nickel mines. There are peoples in Papua that are protecting their land from the food estate program currently happening in the area. There are indigenous peoples in the forests of Ecuador defending it from the gold mines. And I suppose the closest example that I could give is of my people, the Sungai Utik people, who for the last, I would say, 50 or so years have defended our forests, our rivers, our nature from all of the logging companies that wanted to come into our territories. And then going into the misconceptions about Indigenous peoples, there are still plenty, of course, some that I see on a daily basis. I guess when we think about Indigenous peoples, there has always been this one-dimensional idea of what indigenous peoples are like. They're people who practice cultures, people who wear traditional outfits. But I guess what I want to convey is that indigenous peoples are so much more than that. We are more than just our traditional culture, our outfits, our we are so much more nuanced than that. I think an example of that would be like what I'm doing right now, using medias like films, using cameras, and using all of these technologies, all of these tools that were once colonial too, and taking it back into our own hands, using it for our purpose as a movement of indigenous peoples, a movement towards the recognition of our rights as peoples, really.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. That makes perfect sense. So I guess, why would you say the story of an Earth Defender is so relevant today?
If I can jump in, I would say that like Earth Defenders are on the front line of the defense for nature. They are the people who are on the sites in the ecosystems, in the middle of the biodiversity, standing up to protect their land, to protect the waters, to protect the forest. Most of us, we live in cities and in different places, but we rely on these ecosystems. They are our life support systems. So we need to protect them, and these are the people who are actually protecting these ecosystems.
For sure, and I still think a lot of people don't really realize what happens if we don't protect the ecosystem. Like, it's as if you're not protecting your own body, your lungs or your heart, you die, and that is what is going to happen to the world. So I think it's important that we should do what we can, and that's what this video is about, raising awareness of that.
Yeah, another really interesting thing to keep in mind, which is attached to this, very much to this story, is how, of course, indigenous peoples traditionally have been exploited for as long as colonialism is a thing. And if we look ahead into our future, we have to transition to a green system. We have to make a new energy system, which we are very much working on, right, as a humanity. And there's over 50% of transition minerals that we need for our green energy system are actually located on indigenous land. So indigenous peoples, we need to make sure that we don't exploit further, and we repeat the mistakes we've done in the past. And we need to very much create an awareness and open a dialogue to creating a fair transition to this new system for everyone involved. And yeah, indigenous peoples are part of that, and they hold the key really to our future in many ways. And us coming from the West and living in a city, it's hard to understand that. And I think this film is trying to also open you up to those kind of conversations and knowledge, and making you see that we need to listen and we need to work together.
Yeah, and you guys making this video had the rare opportunity to live with the Sunga tribe for a month. What was that like?
It was super interesting. I would highly recommend it to everyone, if you have a chance, because you will learn so much. And I think especially what stood out is like the unity within the community. Like, everyone is really looking after each other. And then Kynan can probably say a lot more about this, but at the Sunga community, there is this beautiful longhouse. It's about 200 meters long, and it's entirely made of wood. So there's all these houses connected to each other. All the front doors open in this longhouse that you see in the film. And the whole community comes together in the longhouse and sit together on the wooden floors. And there's no loneliness amongst all people, because you just sit in the longhouse and there's always someone to chat with, or to communicate with, or to interact with some children. And all the food that is eaten is grown on the same land. All the rice that we ate, the ferns that were harvested from the forest. And I think what stood out most to me is really the spirituality that lives, that is alive within this community. And I remember on one of the days early on in the research process, one of the community members asked us, do you want to follow us to the land to see how we grow the crops? And it was only maybe 15 minutes away. We had to go through the forest and cross a river. But we had to stop about 3-4 times along the way there, really to ask for permission, kind of to go further, to make a little sacrifice or like an offer from bamboo, put some rice in it. Then when we wanted to make a turn, we had to pick up some dirt and rub it on the front of our heads. And before we, were able to taste some of the cassava that was grown on the land, like some liquid, a bit of a drink was spilled on the land to ask for permission. And it's all this kind of little symbols where there is a layer of respect from the community towards the nature. And there is this constant connection with nature, which I find so interesting and inspiring.
Yeah, that's really interesting hearing about how it's all about community respect and savoring rather than unnecessary luxury and waste. And, that's something that isn't that, it doesn't feel that prominent in like cities and stuff these days. So, I think you kind of explained why Indigenous rights and peoples are important for our collective future. And maybe you can talk more about that if you want. But I think if you live in a city far away from Indigenous territories, why is this important to basically the rest of the world? Because, living in the UK, we don't really have Indigenous people, and it can feel quite removed to hear this sort of story. So, but it's still incredibly important to the world.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. I suppose we've already touched on why Indigenous people's rights are so important, right? But why would this be? How can this be to people living very different lives? I think that's what we wanted to try and convey through the films, to be able to show that Indigenous peoples are very much peoples first and foremost, right? Showing the connection between the father and the son, and how this can be relevant. I think the biggest thing is just being able to learn from how Indigenous peoples, maybe specifically like my people in Sungai Utik, we view our land, our forests, our rivers. We see the land as our mother. We see the forest as our father, and we see the river as our blood. And I guess maybe like if we try and see the world in that way, then maybe it's going to be a very different world. Like that's the kind of conversation that I really want to try and start. Like what if we do see the land as our mother and we treat it as such?
Yeah, and I understand that it can be sounding like something that's happening very far away. Like, what can we do about it when we live in a city? But yeah, we have to kind of look at our relationship with nature through our radius, through our anything that happens, occurs like in our 50-meter radius that we can actually touch and improve. Like, what are the products that we buy, that we bring into it? How are we treating the land? Can I take a bike today instead of a car? It's like there's all these things that actually give us a lot of power to work on our relationship with nature. And when we came back, I felt my society is actually very individualistic. People go into their own homes. And what we experienced in this community was there's so much coming together, and there was so much exchange of energy and joy in all of that. So I really wish we can kind of like recreate that.
Yeah, I agree. Kynan, do you think you could tell us a little bit more about where you're from and the Sungai Utik people, and how, a bit of the history and how you do manage to hold on to the land?
Yeah. Sil talked about this a little bit, but Sungai Utik is this one village in the heart of Borneo, the island of Borneo. And in our village, there's around 200 to 300 people living on more than 9,000 hectares of forest. And this is forest that we've been living off of for more than 100 years now. But back in the 1970s, there were It was a period of really rapid deforestation in the area, logging companies left and right. And since then, our elders, my grandfather, my grandmother, they were the ones who were at the front lines defending our forests. And that's why to this day we still have that forest. But it wasn't an easy journey, to say the least. Like, and it wasn't just a one-time occurrence. The companies, they kept coming one after another, and because of that, our elders, they had to put up this fight again and again and again. And it's very much an intergenerational thing. It's passed down from my grandparents' generations to my parents' generations, and now it's passed down to my generation. And this is a process that is going to continue to happen if we don't put a stop to the root cause of this, right? These extractive industries that has no respect for the natural world.
Thank you. And I guess that's why we have like non-governmental organizations working for indigenous rights to try and protect the land and the peoples. So one of the partners of this project was AMAN, or I don't know, AMAN, working on indigenous rights. Can you explain further who they are and what they're trying to achieve?
Yeah, so AMAN is short for Aliansi Masyarakat Adat Nusantara, or in English, Indigenous Peoples Alliance of the Archipelago. And this organization is like the umbrella organization to hundreds and thousands of indigenous communities throughout Indonesia. And it's a movement towards the empowerment of indigenous uh, peoples who have been marginalized historically. And what the movement is striving towards is towards the empowerment of indigenous peoples here, and also for the recognition of their rights, because in so many places throughout Indonesia and also throughout the entire world, the rights of these communities, these peoples, these very real peoples that, like you saw in the Earth Defender videos, so many of the times their rights are still violated. Their rights to live on their land, their rights to live in many cases. And so that's what Aman is trying to advocate for. In Indonesia, there's currently a draft bill on indigenous peoples that would give the indigenous peoples in Indonesia, at least, the rightful right to autonomy on their land, to be able to manage it using their traditional customs, and to truly live out of it. But unfortunately, this bill has been in the works for more than a decade now, and it's still stuck in the national government. And so that's what we're trying to push for with this campaign. The pledge that you have at the end of the music film. And maybe Yorick or Sil could talk a bit more about that. But yeah, that's what Aman is doing.
Yeah, I think with so much of the work, Ali, that we have also done together, like we try to find a way for people to get involved, right? And for people to help in any way that they can. So this pledge is a way for us to, even if you live in a city or you're far away, to put your voice as part of the conversation, and to say, hey, I want this to happen. I want indigenous peoples to have their rights, and they are truly the best stewards of the land that we have in our modern world at the moment. Because as many of us know, governments are failing us, corporations are winning. They get the legal documents to take down forests when there's people living there, and they have been living in these areas for hundreds of years, but they don't have documentation. They don't have the legal rights to actually tell the government, I live here, and therefore this is my land. You can't just take this from me. And that's what Amman is fighting. They're trying to find ways legally to say this is these communities' lands, and they are the best stewards of it. The Sungai Utik, the community where Kynan lives, the way that they take care of the land is they have a huge area of forest, like Kynan mentioned, and they use a very small part of it for their own harvesting and their farming, and everything else is primary rainforest that is left intact, that is hundreds of years old, that has never been deforested, which has biodiversity. If that's taken away, it will never come back in that way. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about these kind of last pieces of critical biodiversity that we have left on our planet, that we can protect because we know who can protect them so well. So sign the pledge.
Yeah, I was going to ask how people can get involved and what you want people to take away from this film, but I think you kind of said it, and I think people understand what we're trying to point towards here. Yeah.
Yeah, and secondly, Ali, also, if there's anyone or even watching it, the film is used or is intended as a piece of advocacy for the movement, for indigenous rights, for Earth Defenders. So if you want to share, or if you want to use the film for showing it as part of your organization, like, people should reach out to us and we can help them get in touch and tell this story and spread it as far as we can.
Yeah, that's the whole point of it, raise awareness.
Yep. And I think also, like, if you're interested in this topic, it's I would suggest do a search maybe on social media to indigenous voices and listen to their stories and maybe share some of these stories, because we need to give a platform to these people who are protecting our forest. And Ali, we were also very curious, like, this is I think the third or fourth music video now that we did on this topic for you, like a pro-planet message. What did that mean for you? Like, did that affect your music in any way, or how you make music?
It's a good question. Like the importance of this stuff has never really gone over my head. I've been raised very mindful of it, but it's hard to feel like you can do anything about it. So, like, the main thing that working with you guys has done for me in that respect is, like you do for a lot of people, is teach me and allow me to use my voice and following for more good. And I think the way you guys approach it makes me want to do it, and I think it helps it resonate with people. So I'm not the most forward-facing person in this industry, and I don't want to be seen a lot of the time for the sake of being seen. So working with you guys to tell someone else's real stories allows me to move the focus off me from time to time. And the involvement in this stuff just inspires conversations, whether that's directly in my life with friends who watch this video and come to me and talk to me about it and don't know anything about this, or between fans, or people who work in spaces that can help. It's just kind of, the more we know, the better, and that's what the film is here for, and that's the kind of thing I want to, I feel good about being involved in. From a musical sense, my music has always been about the kind of self-expression, what's inside, and about having fun or being absorbed by sound, because that's just a big interest of mine. I don't make music directly for political or environmental situations. However, working with you guys just inspires me to consider that world around my music more and look into it from a slightly different sphere. For example, we didn't make any music videos for my last album, which is, I guess, fairly rare for an artist. But then considering your work and it being for a good cause, we put the energy and the money into this instead. It just feels like a bit, it feels a bit more selfless and a way that I can help. So while the music itself, I don't think is changed that much, it's just everything around my music has changed from working with you guys a bit. Just the considerations I've put into different aspects of my industry. So it feels like I'm doing a small thing to help, but it's just a happy thing for me to be involved in and know that we're doing some sort of good together, and it be creative.
Yeah, it's amazing. We really feel enabled by someone like you who is also willing to share their platform with your fan base to help tell important stories like this. So yeah, thank you so much for this.
No worries.
Yeah,
collaboration.
really appreciate that, Alec.
I love working with you guys, and the older I get and the more I've traveled the world touring and seen communities around the world, the more you open your minds to what is out there and what needs to change and what you can change within yourself, and better ways of life. Really, I'm not one to consider that me living in the UK is the best life I could have and the best government. It's definitely not. So there is inspiration to be taken from other communities like the indigenous people that would benefit the whole world. And I think that's what this film is also trying to impart on people. Yeah.
I think it's really beautiful that that you allow your platform and share this with your audience. And one of the things that we have a relationship going way back, but everything that we do always touches on that element of nature and the relationship that we have with it. And that's, as if a lot of people in the West living in cities or wherever in the world, if you live in a city, you're so disconnected from that. And this film is very much about people who still have that connection. Because your studio is also like in the countryside, right? Or you're always surrounded by quite a lot of green. Like, how important is that for you in your life and in the work that you're, like, your inspiration, where you're getting that from, or your day-to-day and your sanity also, like how to keep sane in this world, ever crazier world?
It definitely makes me feel like a bit safer, in a way. I like being surrounded by nature. It's kind of serene and calm. It feels like a slightly more slower paced version of life and less demanding. I can get more quiet when I want it, and I have like sound sensory issues where I don't want too much loud sounds around me. So it can be useful in that respect as well. It's in somewhat inspiring to my music, but there's also negative sides to it. Like I said, it makes me feel safer. It makes me feel like if there's a war, I'm a bit more okay up here in the hills. I like being able to recognize the seasons changing, which I couldn't do as much in the city where I used to live. Just look out my window and see like the trees changing colors, the moon being and the sun being in different position in the sky in different months of the year. It does kind of add a connection to nature, which I think people are missing in cities sometimes.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
I read this quote once that like people living in like concrete, they make electronic music, and people in the countryscape make very different music. So do you feel influenced a bit by the landscape in your music?
I don't know if I feel the influence, but I think it's subconscious and it plays out. Like, yeah. I think location is very important in people's lives, and it determines how they present themselves sometimes and how they express their art. So I don't know if I would have made the album I made if I was living in the city. So I can't really show exactly what the influence is and what it's really doing, but it's all part of life, and that all kind of feeds into music and gets expressed. Yeah. But I mean, what has the response to the film been so far? And did other Indigenous people see it?
Yeah, I think quite a few people saw it by now, which is really amazing. We have been having, I think, a very good response to the film. Like, people who really seem to connect with it. I think for me, the most interesting response came from other Indigenous communities. We were at COP29 only a week ago, where we met other Indigenous people, and there was one woman specifically who came out of the audience after we screened the film, and she was from, I think it was Colombia, and she was being translated by another woman, and she was like, I just saw my own story here on screen. My uncle was murdered only a couple of days before that. So she was very overwhelmed with grief. And then she also said, now I feel like I have to step into his shoes and take over his role. I have to now defend our land. So she was very touched by it. And the translator kind of couldn't keep her eyes dry. And we also saw comments from people from indigenous communities from Canada and from the Philippines, like, thank you for sharing this story. So that to me is the most valuable. It's like, this is what we try to do and amplify these stories and feel like other communities are actually heard by this. But I'm also very curious to hear from Kynan, what has been the feedback for you.
Yeah, totally. Like you said, the feedback from like fellow indigenous peoples has been really touching and really moving for me, because this is a story that's, for a lot of people, it's not just a story, it's a reality, right? There are people living these lives, living the things that you see on the film, and um, and that's something that's really rare for us to see. Like growing up, I watched way too much TV growing up, but I never saw any of my people on the big screen. I never saw indigenous peoples, uh, and when you actually do, in the very rare occasions that you see representation, quote unquote, it's so much of the time it's from a very colonial gaze. It's from a very tokenistic, it's in a very tokenistic way. And I suppose that's one thing that was really moving for a lot of people. And also, like, personally for me, like I feel like the whole process of making this film, it's a process that was very, very substantive. Being able to portray our own stories, it means a lot. And I think a lot of people expressed how much it also means to them.
Awesome. Well, it's obviously very good to hear. Is there any questions we want to field from people in the chat about all this, or maybe we can answer one or two or something? I think there was a question about not really so much the landscape, but more about kind of the preservation of the animals that live there as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I see a question about the orangutans. There are, I think this is in most places of the world, there are preserves, right? There are natural, the government has certain areas where we can't go or we shouldn't touch, and they try to preserve it. But this is what is at stake as well, because in many of these, in many of the countries where we still have biodiversity, to a great extent, these lines where these animals live are not being respected. And a lot of these conservation areas and these national parks are actually being used for mining, for palm oil, etc. Even for sometimes carbon offsets, like carbon credits. Like these are also schemes that are being abused a lot. So the regulation of all of this has to be much more stricter. So yeah, unfortunately, the territories of orangutans are diminishing. The populations are diminishing. So this is, it's great, a question like that, because this all connected. All this is connected with each other.
Cool. Yeah, well said. Another question. I'll just. What's the latest one? My questions are: any future plans collaborating with Novo More, raising awareness to invisible matters like this is important, and the way you guys storytell themselves is impressive. I guess, we haven't spoken about any future projects together, but I don't think this is the last thing we'll ever do together. So we like working together. and you guys aren't slowing down in the kind of films you make. So, yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, we have a lot of work to do, a lot of films to make.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask if this movement can reach the government of countries? I mean, that's the hope, isn't it? That's that you guys were the COP29 summit to try and raise awareness of this and bring it right into the face of governments. Maybe you can explain like briefly what the COP is and like what your time there was realistically like and what you did.
Yeah, we attended COP29. COP29 was held in Baku, Azerbaijan this year, and it's the conference of parties where policy makers and government delegates, officials come together to really make policies for nature. You're Kynan.
Yeah, it's the United Nations. It's the conference of the United Nations where they tried collectively with almost every single country in the world make agreements on what are we going to do about climate change, about biodiversity loss, about all of the huge issues that we have. And this COP was specifically about finance and climate change because that's a massive part of how we're going to solve the issues in the future. Is how we're going to find the money for it, because we already have $300 billion a year in damages caused by climate change, and this is expected to rise to 700, 800 billion in just a couple of years. So how are we going to pay for this? Who's going to pay for it? That is also a big question, right? So there's a big movement right now that fossil fuel companies should be paying for the damage that they're causing. And a lot of this money needs to be used the right way. It needs to be put into the hands of local communities and of local governments and of indigenous people so that they can have the tools to fight climate change. They can have the right finances to put things in place and prevent a lot of the damage as well that is being caused. So that's the discussions that are happening at the moment. And we were there with this story because how do policymakers connect with, how do they make the right decisions if they don't understand the real stories? A lot of these times, these policymakers, these lawmakers, they are in these rooms lit by fluorescent lighting in suits, completely disconnected from the subject that they're making decisions about. And we try to take, and we and a lot of other storytellers at COP, they try to come there and activists to tell these stories of the reality of the people on the ground who are saying, this is what we're experiencing, this is what we're feeling, we're people, and this is what we're what's happening to us. And with the hope that the policymakers are listening and making the right decisions.
Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting. I think a lot of people don't really know that this stuff takes place. It's rare to get the opportunity to go and be a part of that and watch the governments fail to keep promises, which is cool. Yeah, I don't know if there's any other questions or anything you guys wanted to say. Otherwise, yeah.
I would like to add that, like, walking around COP, there were so many suits there. It was like 90% business, and like money is not all bad necessarily, of course. Like it has to go to the right things. If it goes to like renewable energies or like stuff like that, of course, like we live in a society, in a system that's still based on money, so we still need it. But what was kind of shocking is just the underrepresentation of indigenous people. And when we attended indigenous people's talks, there were no suits in the room, and that was quite sad. It's really like, how do we bridge that gap? And I think there is definitely misconceptions about indigenous people, but there's also just a misunderstanding of the importance of their story they have to tell. So I just wish that we start to amplify indigenous voices much more through whatever means we have. So that's what we try to do with this film. But I don't know if you're a filmmaker or you're an artist, or I don't know, there's ways to amplify these stories by sharing or just putting your focus on the people who really protect our planet.
I think activism looks very different for everyone. It's a really important thing to understand that, we cannot all maybe march on the streets, and we don't all have the luxury or the capability of having time in the day and resources to go to protests, but we can be activism in our own way. Like even Ali, you doing this film is a form of that. Choosing to live slightly different, making different choices is a form of activism. I think all of these, we need all of that. So that's the message, I think, as well to everyone is get involved in your own way that you can.
And maybe if we are going to wrap this call, I would really love for Kynan kind of to have the last words, maybe of some things, some inspiration to share, or a message for us to go out with.
Yeah, I mean, just echoing what you guys have already said. These spaces like COP, these decision-making spaces, they always feel so out of touch, and us trying to reach those spaces, trying to affect the kinds of changes that we need, that's what we're all trying to do. And because of that, I do think that it's like what Yorick said, activism can take so many different forms. Like there are those who are trying to reach the spaces, who are trying to go up to countries, the diplomats in suits, and trying to lobby for the right changes to take place. But I think what's really beautiful about media, about things like films, pieces of writings, art, is that it can lead to a change in how we think, how we see things as a collective. And the hope is for this way of thinking, that stems from indigenous peoples, at least for the film, that for Earth Defender to be able to be a part of our collective consciousness, to start imagining a different kind of world, is to me the best first step in being able to reach it. So sign the petition, and yeah, giving it back to you.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for that, and all of you for being here and talking about the film, and for going out and making the film. It's beautiful, and if anyone's here watching this chat and hasn't seen it, or hasn't seen the making of film, which we put out this morning, which explains kind of more of this, go and watch it. So thank you everyone for being here, for the support, and thank you to Yorick and Kynan. Yeah, I guess we'll wrap up. Thanks.